Sorry about that, sort of a jinx chapter. All right, the third big idea in this chapter is the two main ways or mechanisms of speciation. Allopatric, as I explained before, literally means different country. Sympatric, same country. And out of the two, allopatric occurs much, much, much more often. All right, and this is just a little illustration. You have two fish, or a population of fish in the same pond. If there's a barrier between them, a geographical barrier, this is starting to dry off, and we have two different ponds, then the two groups of fish can start to evolve differently because they'll have different selection pressures on them. But there are times that organisms can continue to share the same area, and they will still evolve into two different species. Allopatric versus sympatric. So in our little make-believe story of the blue people, that would be an example of which one? Well, we still share the same area with the blue people, so that would be an example of sympatric speciation. All right, allopatric speciation gene flow, right, between the populations is interrupted by some sort of geographic barrier. So, and once the two populations are isolated by the geographic barrier, then natural selection can work differently, act differently on the two populations. You can also have different mutations occur in the two different populations, and just if one population is small, you might have the allelic frequency due to genetic drift, which is just due to chance alone. So here's an example. There were two different species of chipmunks living on different sides of the Grand Canyon. So let's think about this. Now, for me, it's easier to illustrate this with a mountain range rather than a Grand Canyon, but you get the idea. So let's say these little triangles represent a mountain range. So what we have, yeah, I'm not a very good artist, a population of chipmunks migrating south, and they encounter this mountain range. Well, some might go to the west side of the mountain range, and some travel to the eastern sides of the mountain range. And they might not meet up again for hundreds or even thousands of years. And during this time, these two subpopulations of chipmunks, they again might be exposed to different selection pressures. So when the chipmunks finally meet up, if they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, they would still be the same species. But if their genetics have changed enough, they would be two different species of chipmunks that are very closely related. And that's what we think has happened on the Grand Canyon here. Instead of a mountain range, we have this canyon. Two very similar chipmunks, but they have been evolving separately for hundreds of years, and we don't think that they can mate and produce fertile offspring anymore. So it's important to note that the geographical barrier does not cause speciation. It allows for the two populations to start evolving differently. All right, and sort of evidence of this is that in regions that have many geological barriers that separate populations, have many more species. All right, once again, in sympatric speciation, the organisms still share the same area, but they're still able to speciate, or they're still able to diverge. Now, one way this happens is with what's called polyploidy. Now, this is very common actually in plants, where there's some kind of mess up in meiosis, and the new cell ends up with more chromosomes than it should. So in this diagram, the normal number of chromosomes per cell is 6, but it fails to divide properly, and now we have 12 chromosomes per cell. And now this offspring could no longer mate with the parent plant. Again, polyploidy is very common in plants. Plants tolerate polyploidy very well. In fact, many of our important crops, as you can see here, oats, cotton, potatoes, tobacco, and wheat, they are all polyploids. Animals, we don't really deal with extra chromosomes too well. In fact, you might remember that the condition Down syndrome is caused by just having one extra chromosome per body cell. And as I mentioned before, sexual selection, which is a form of natural selection, that can actually drive speciation. And your book talks about how these different species of fish arose in Lake Victoria due to sexual selection. So I think this is where I'm going to end it. This is the highlights of chapter 24, and I'll see you in the next video.